Single father helps a woman on the road, not realizing she is the daughter of a wealthy farmer. The car engine sputtered one last time before dying completely. Savannah slammed her hands on the steering wheel, feeling despair take hold of her chest. The red dirt road stretched out in both directions, with no sign of life for miles. The yellow dress with tiny flowers was already clinging to her body from sweat, and her delicate sandals were not made for walking through the countryside. Caleb James pulled on the horse's reins when he saw smoke rising from the hood of the silver sedan. For 15 years working on the local farms, he knew all the residents around there, but this woman was a complete stranger. The leather hat shielded his eyes from the strong afternoon sun, but even so he could see the desperation on her face. The young woman looked at the man approaching on the Palomino horse. He wore a faded red shirt, dirt-stained jeans, and worn-out boots. His unshaven beard and mustache gave a rugged look to his sunburned face. He wasn't exactly the kind of person she expected to run into, but at that moment, any help would be welcome. "Car trouble, ma'am?" Caleb James dismounted the horse nimbly, taking off his hat to reveal his graying brown hair. At 42 years old, he kept the sturdy build of someone who had worked hard since he was a boy. "The engine overheated," Savannah replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite her nervousness. "I don't know anything about cars. I was on my way to Savannah when it started making noise." Caleb James approached the open hood, studying the engine with an experienced eye. The radiator was empty, and there were signs of a leak. That car would need a tow truck. There was no way to fix it out on the road. "You'll need to call a tow truck. There's no fixing it out here," he said, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. "The nearest garage is in Blue Ridge, about 12 miles from here." Savannah's heart raced. 12 miles meant at least 2 hours on foot, and the sun was starting to set. She looked at the golden horizon, calculating if she had time before it got completely dark. The thought of being alone on that deserted road at night terrified her. "Ma'am, you're not from around here, are you?" Caleb James asked, noticing her nervousness. "Because if you were, you'd know this road gets dangerous after dark. Real desolate, you know how it is." "I'm from Atlanta," she lied quickly. "I work as a secretary at a law firm. I was visiting an aunt in Savannah when the car broke down." Caleb James studied her for a moment. Her hands were too soft for someone who worked in an office, her nails perfectly done, and her dress, even if simple, had a fit that only expensive clothes could achieve. Something didn't add up in that story, but he decided not to question it. "Look, I can take you to town. I live in Blue Ridge myself, so it's no detour," he offered, gesturing to the horse. "Of course, you'll have to ride on the back, but it's better than staying here alone." Savannah hesitated for a moment. Accepting help from a stranger wasn't exactly what she had planned, but options were limited. She needed to get out of that area as fast as possible before someone found her. "I accept," she said finally. "Thank you so much. I don't know how to repay you." Caleb James smiled for the first time, revealing slightly crooked teeth but a genuine grin. "Don't mention it, ma'am. Around here in the countryside, we look out for each other. What's your name?" "Anna," she answered quickly, omitting her last name. "And yours?" "Caleb James, but everyone just calls me Cal." He helped Savannah onto the back of the horse, careful not to be improper. She held onto his waist when the animal started moving, catching the smell of sweat mixed with dirt coming from his red shirt. During the first few minutes of the ride, they traveled in silence. Savannah tried to process how her life had changed drastically in just a few hours. That morning she had still been at her father's farm, pretending to accept the arranged marriage. Now she was fleeing on the back of a horse, depending on the kindness of a complete stranger. "Do you have family in Atlanta?" Caleb James asked, breaking the silence. "Anyone who needs to know you're okay?" "No, I don't have anyone close there," she lied again. "My parents are no longer with us." The lie came easier than she expected, but brought a pang of guilt. Her parents were indeed alive, especially her father, who had probably already discovered her escape and was organizing a search across the entire region. "I'm sorry," Caleb James said sincerely. "I know what it's like to be alone in the world. I lost my wife 6 years ago. Since then, it's just me and my daughter." Savannah felt her chest tighten. She had lied about having no family, while he was being completely honest about his life. "How old is your daughter?" 12? Madeline. But everyone calls her Maddie, he replied with pride in his voice. She's a smart girl, you know. Gets good grades at school, helps around the house. Sometimes I'm amazed at how mature she is for her age. It must be hard raising a girl alone, Savannah commented, imagining what it would be like to have that responsibility. It has its challenges, Caleb James admitted, especially now that she's entering her teens. There are things a girl needs to talk about with her mother, you know. But we manage. She's my whole life. The love in his voice was impossible to ignore. Savannah wondered if her own father had ever spoken of her with such tenderness. Her memories were always of demands, expectations, and disappointments. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and hit the like button and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot who are just starting out. Now continuing. The horse followed a trail that cut through pastures fenced with barbed wire. The sun was lower now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was a beautiful landscape, different from the view Savannah had from her bedroom window at her father's farm. There was a simplicity there that calmed her troubled heart. "Do you work with cattle?" she asked, trying to keep the conversation going and push away thoughts about her situation. "A bit of everything. I work at Mr. Bennett's farm, about 6 miles from Blue Ridge. I take care of the cattle, fix fences, plant, harvest. Whatever needs to be done," he explained. "It's not easy work, but it's enough to support me and Maddie." "And doesn't she feel lonely? I mean, not having a mother around?" Caleb James was quiet for a moment, as if choosing the right words. "I think she does. But she never complains. Sometimes I see her watching other girls with their mothers, and I notice a sadness in her eyes. I try to make up for it by being both father and mother, but I know it's not the same." Savannah felt a pang in her heart. She had a mother, but from a young age she had learned that expressing feelings was a sign of weakness. The Sterling family didn't show affection, only expectations and obligations. "I'm sure she feels loved," Savannah said softly. "That's already more than many children have." "I hope so," Caleb James sighed. "Sometimes I feel insecure about whether I'm doing everything right, especially when she asks me questions about things I don't know how to explain properly." They turned onto a paved road leading to the center of Blue Ridge. The first houses began to appear, small buildings with yards full of plants and clothes hanging on the line. It was a scene completely different from the life Savannah knew. "Where would you like me to drop you off?" Caleb James asked when they reached the first streets of the city. Savannah looked around, trying to think quickly. She didn't know a soul there, had nowhere to go. Her original plan was to hit the road and head far away, maybe Chicago or New York, where she could lay low until she figured out what to do with her life. "Is there any inn or hotel in town?" "There's Martha's Guest House on Main Street. It's simple but clean," he replied. "Or there's the hotel on the road to Savannah, but that one's more expensive." "The guest house will do," she said quickly. She needed to save the money she had managed to grab before running away. Caleb James took her to a single-story house painted light blue, with a small sign on the door. "Martha's Guest House, rooms by the night." It was a humble place but inviting, with potted plants at the entrance and floral curtains in the windows. He got off the horse and helped her down as well. For a moment they stood facing each other, unsure exactly how to say goodbye. "Thank you so much for everything," Savannah said sincerely. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't shown up." "Don't mention it. If you need anything, you can ask anyone around town where to find me. Everybody knows Cal from Bennett's farm." She nodded and turned to go into the guest house, but Caleb James called out to her again. "Anna." "Yes, take care, okay? I don't know why, but I get the feeling you're running from something. If that's true, I hope you find what you're looking for." Savannah's heart raced. He had picked up on more than she had imagined. For a moment she felt like telling him the truth, but she knew it would be dangerous to involve a stranger in her troubles. "Thank you," she said simply, before stepping into the guest house. Caleb James mounted his horse and watched the door for a few minutes before heading home. There was something about that woman that stirred him in a way he couldn't explain. It wasn't just her obvious beauty, but a mix of fragility and strength that awakened his protective instinct. Inside the guest house, Savannah was greeted by a woman in her 50s, grey hair pinned up in a bun and a warm smile. "Good afternoon, dear," Need a room? Yes, please, for a few nights if possible. Mrs. Martha studied her quickly, noticing the wrinkled yellow dress and the tired look on the young woman's face. Sure, I've got a little room in the back. It's simple, but it's got everything you need. It's $20 a night, breakfast included. Savannah paid for 3 nights in advance, grateful she had been able to grab some money before fleeing. Mrs. Martha led her to a small but cozy room with a single bed, a wooden wardrobe, and a little window overlooking a backyard with a chicken coop. If you need anything, just call me, the woman said. Dinner's at 7 if you'd like to join. When she was alone, Savannah sat on the bed and finally let the tears fall. The reality of her situation began to weigh on her shoulders. She had run away from home without a concrete plan, with little money and no guarantee that she could hide from her father for long. Colonel Arthur Sterling was not a man who accepted challenges to his authority, especially from his own daughter. He had planned that wedding for months, seeing it as a chance to expand his business and consolidate his influence in the area. Savannah's refusal would not be tolerated easily. She remembered the conversation she had overheard by chance between her father and Mr. Preston Harrington, the fiancé he had chosen. His words still echoed in her mind. A woman needs to know her place from an early age. If you let it go too loose, it becomes hard to control later. The way he spoke about her, as if she were an object to be acquired, had been the last straw. Savannah had always known her father was authoritarian, but at that moment she realized he was willing to hand his daughter over to a man with even more backward ideas than his own. Meanwhile, Caleb James was arriving home, a simple 3-room construction on a plot of land on the outskirts of Blue Ridge. The house was small but well kept, with a backyard where he grew some vegetables and raised a few chickens. "Dad!" Madeline ran to hug him as soon as he walked in. She was a pretty girl, with the same brown eyes as her father and long, straight hair. "You're late today. I was starting to get worried." "Sorry, sweetheart. I helped a woman on the road whose car broke down," he explained, affectionately ruffling her hair. "What woman?" Maddie asked, with the typical curiosity of her age. "A secretary from Atlanta. Her car broke down on the dirt road coming from Savannah. I brought her here to town." "Was she pretty?" the girl asked with a sly smile. Caleb James laughed, recognizing his daughter's not-so-subtle attempt to get him interested in someone. Ever since she turned 10, Maddie had developed an obsession with finding a new mom for herself, even though Caleb James had never shown any interest in being with anyone. "She was, but don't go imagining things. I only helped her because she needed it," he said, trying to change the subject. "How was school today?" "Normal. The Portuguese teacher said my essay about family was really good," Maddie replied proudly. "That's great. What did you write about?" "About what it's like living just with my dad and how it made me grow up faster than the other girls in class." Caleb James felt his chest tighten. Even without openly complaining, Maddie showed between the lines that she missed having a female presence at home. "You know you can talk to me about anything, right?" "I know, Dad. But some things are different when you talk to a woman. Heather's mom explained to her about girl stuff that you wouldn't know how to explain properly." Caleb James sighed. This conversation came up more and more often, and he knew he'd soon need to find a way to address topics he really didn't know much about. "When the time comes, we'll talk or find someone who can help you, okay?" Maddie nodded and ran off to do her homework. Caleb James prepared a simple dinner, fried chicken with cornbread, while thinking about the woman he'd helped on the road. There was something about her he couldn't get out of his head. At the guest house, Savannah ate dinner alone in the small dining room, watching the other guests. They were mostly farm workers in town on business, or travelers passing through. No one paid much attention to her, which was exactly what she wanted. After dinner, she went to the town's only internet cafe and tried to search for job opportunities in other regions. She knew she needed a job quickly, as the money she had wouldn't last long. While browsing the internet, her cell phone rang. The name Home appeared on the screen, making her heart race. It was the phone at her father's farm. She let it ring until it went to voicemail, but immediately afterward the phone rang again. On the third call, she turned the phone off completely. She knew it was only a matter of time until her father found out where she was, especially if he decided to track her cell phone signal. At the Sterling estate, 15 miles from Blue Ridge, Colonel Arthur was furious. A 62-year-old man with completely white hair and a bearing that commanded both respect and fear in equal measure. His business interests included cattle, soybean plantations, and some ventures he preferred not to discuss in public. "What do you mean she disappeared?" he yelled at the maid who had discovered Savannah's empty room. "No one leaves this estate without me knowing." "Colonel, the bedroom door was locked from the inside when I went to bring breakfast. When you had it broken down, she was already gone," the woman explained nervously. "And her car." "It's not in the garage, Colonel." Arthur Sterling paced back and forth in his office, trying to control his anger. The wedding to Mr. Preston Harrington was set for 2 weeks from now, and he had already given his word. Cancelling now would be a public humiliation he wasn't willing to accept. "Call Silas. Have him come here with 2 men, he ordered the caretaker. "And call Mr. Harrington. Tell him there's been a slight hiccup, but we'll take care of it quickly." Silas was the estate foreman, a man known in the region for his loyalty to the colonel and for solving problems efficiently and discreetly. Within hours, he was in the office with 2 other men, waiting for orders. "My daughter decided to do something stupid and run away from home. I want her back here tonight," Arthur said bluntly. "Search every town in the area. Ask at gas stations, hotels, wherever you need to." "And if she doesn't want to come back?" Silas asked. The look the colonel shot him was enough to leave no doubt about how the situation should be handled. Back at the guest house, Savannah tried to sleep, but fear kept her awake. Every noise on the street made her jump out of bed and peek through the curtain. She knew she was being paranoid, but she knew her father's temper and his ability to mobilize people to get what he wanted. The next morning she woke up early and had breakfast with Mrs. Martha and 2 other guests. The conversation was about the drought affecting the region and how it impacted the lives of farm workers. "Things aren't easy for anyone," Mrs. Martha commented. "A lot of folks are losing their jobs on the farms because there's nothing to do without rain." "At least the big landowners don't feel it as much," one of the men said. "They have irrigation, artesian wells. The ones who really get screwed are the small farmers and the hands." Savannah listened to the conversation in silence, remembering how her father always complained about the costs of the property, but never really went without. The perspective was completely different when seen from the bottom of the social ladder. After breakfast, she went out to explore the town more. Blue Ridge was small, with one main street where the shops and basic services were concentrated. There was a pharmacy, a small market, a clothing store, the internet cafe where she'd been the night before, and a few bars. At the bakery, she bought some bread and took the chance to chat with the clerk, a very friendly middle-aged woman. "You're not from around here, are you?" the woman asked as she wrapped up the bread. "I'm from Atlanta. I'm visiting the region for work." Savannah lied again. "What kind of work?" Savannah hesitated for a moment. She hadn't come up with a convincing story to explain her presence in town. "Research. About the region. For a magazine," she improvised quickly. "How interesting. It's been a while since anyone from outside came to research our area. What do you want to know?" "About people's lives here, what everyday life is like, that sort of thing." The woman smiled excitedly and began telling her about the town's history, the traditional families, and how life had changed over the years. Savannah listened politely, but her attention was diverted when she saw a man on horseback passing by on the street. It was Caleb James, and her heart raced for reasons she couldn't explain. He waved when he saw her through the bakery window, and she responded with a shy smile. "Do you know Caleb James?" the clerk asked, following her gaze. "He helped me yesterday when my car broke down on the road." "Oh, Cal, he's a really good guy, you know. A bit quiet but hard-working and honest. He's been raising his daughter on his own since his wife got sick a few years back. A real tragedy, that." "Got sick?" It was sudden. No one ever really understood what happened. She was fine, then all of a sudden she fainted and never woke up, left the little girl so small. Savannah felt a pang in her heart, imagining how hard it must be for Caleb James to raise a daughter alone after losing his wife so suddenly. When she left the bakery, she saw that Caleb James had stopped his horse in front of the pharmacy and was getting down. Without thinking much, she walked toward him. "Good morning," she said as she approached. "Good morning, Savannah. Did you sleep well at the guest house?" he asked, taking off his hat. "Yes. Mrs. Martha is very kind. And you, how is your daughter?" "Maddie's doing fine. Actually, she was really curious about you yesterday," Caleb James said with a smile. "She asked a ton of questions." "What kind of questions?" "Oh, silly kid stuff. If you were pretty, if you were nice, that sort of thing," he answered, looking a little embarrassed. "She has a very vivid imagination," Savannah laughed, finding the situation amusing. "And what did you say?" "The truth, that you seemed like a good person and that you needed help." There was a moment of silence between them, a tension in the air that neither knew how to interpret. Caleb James broke the moment by clearing his throat. "Well, I need to buy some medicine for the horse. He's got a little problem with his hoof." "Of course. I don't want to hold you up," Savannah said quickly. "You're not holding me up," he said, looking directly at her. "Actually, if you don't have anything to do this afternoon, you could stop by the farm where I work. Maddie would be happy to meet you." The invitation took her by surprise. Part of her wanted to accept, but another part knew that the fewer people she met, the better for her safety. I don't know. I don't want to be a bother." "It's no bother at all. The farm is pretty, lots of space. It could be a nice outing for you to see what life is like out here in the countryside." Savannah hesitated for a few more seconds before accepting. "All right. How do I get there?" Caleb James gave her directions, explaining that the farm was about 6 miles from town, following the main road. She could take a bus that passed through the area, or if she preferred, he could pick her up in the late afternoon. "I'd rather take the bus," she said quickly. The idea of becoming dependent on his kindness bothered her. "Then I'll see you around 4 o'clock. After he went into the pharmacy, Savannah returned to the guest house with her heart racing. She couldn't understand why she was so eager to see Caleb James again. Maybe it was just that he had been kind to her in a difficult moment, or maybe it was something more complicated that she preferred not to analyze. During lunch at the guest house, Mrs. Martha mentioned that she had seen Savannah talking to Caleb James on the street. "He's a good man," she said. "Very hard-working, honest. His daughter is a sweetheart, very well-mannered." "Do you know the family well?" "I've known them since they arrived here. That was right after his wife, after the trouble she had. He came here looking for work and ended up staying. Mr. Bennett, the owner of the farm where he works, took a real liking to him." "And the little girl? How did she deal with losing her mother?" "It was hard at first. She was very small, didn't really understand what had happened. But Cal was always very present, very caring. I think that helped a lot." In the afternoon, Savannah took the rural bus heading toward the farm where Caleb James worked. It was an old, noisy bus, but comfortable enough for the short trip. Through the window, she watched the countryside of Georgia, green pastures dotted with cattle, small farms and hills in the distance. Mr. Bennett's farm was a medium-sized property, well looked after and organized. There were clean corrals, a modest but comfortable main house, and several smaller buildings scattered across the land. Caleb James was waiting for her at the gate, accompanied by a girl who was obviously Madeline. "Anna, so glad you came." Maddie ran to greet her, flashing a wide, contagious smile. Savannah was surprised by the girl's immediate warmth. Maddie had the same expressive eyes as her father and a contagious energy that brightened Savannah's grey day. "Hi, Maddie. Your dad told me you're very smart." "He exaggerates," the girl replied, blushing a little. "But I do get good grades. I really like English and math." Caleb James showed Savannah around the farm, explaining the work he did there. She was genuinely interested in his explanations about cattle care, the crop cycle, and the daily routine of a ranch hand. "It's so different from city life," she commented, as she watched a group of cows grazing peacefully. "It is. It has its pros and cons," Caleb James replied. "Life here is simpler, but also more limited, especially for someone with kids. The opportunities for education, for better work, are all far away." "Have you ever thought about moving?" "Sometimes, especially when I see Maddie growing up and realize she might need more than I can offer here. But moving isn't easy when you don't have much savings." Savannah felt a pang in her heart. She had grown up on a much bigger and richer farm than this one. but she had never stopped to think about the limitations it could pose for people like Caleb James and Maddie. During the afternoon, the three of them walked through the pastures, and Maddie didn't stop talking. She told them about school, about her friends, about the books she liked to read, and about her plans for the future. "I want to be a teacher when I grow up," she said with enthusiasm. "I think it would be cool to teach kids how to read and write." "That's a very noble profession," Savannah replied. "Teachers make a difference in people's lives." "Are you a teacher?" Maddie asked. "No, I work in an office, but I've always admired teachers a lot." It was another lie, but this time Savannah felt like making it true. Seeing the girl's excitement reminded her of how much she used to love studying when she was younger, before her father decided that too much education for a woman was dangerous. In the late afternoon, when it was time to head back to the city, Maddie made a request that took everyone by surprise. "Anna, don't you want to have dinner here at home? My dad cooks well, and we still have a lot to talk about." Caleb James turned red, clearly embarrassed by his daughter's boldness. "Maddie, don't go inviting people like that. Anna probably has other plans." "Actually, I don't have any plans at all," Savannah said before she could think. The words came out naturally, as if she really wanted to spend more time with that family. "Then it's settled." Maddie clapped her hands. "I'll help Dad cook a special dinner." Caleb James looked at Savannah with an expression that mixed joy and nervousness. "If you're sure you won't be a bother." "I'm sure," she replied, surprising herself with her own decision. The house where Caleb James and Maddie lived was at the back of the property, a simple but cozy building. It had a small living room, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen and a bathroom. Everything was very clean and organized, with a few decorations made by Maddie scattered around the house. "Sorry if the house is simple," Caleb James said as he received her in the living room. "It's a beautiful house," Savannah replied sincerely. "It has much more warmth than many big houses I know." During the preparation of dinner, Savannah helped in the kitchen, discovering that she really enjoyed cooking. At home, on her father's farm, she had never been encouraged to learn household chores, since there had always been maids for that. "You really know how to cook?" Maddie asked, impressed to see Savannah seasoning the meat so naturally. "I learned recently," Savannah lied partially. In truth, she was improvising, but she seemed to have a natural talent for cooking. During dinner, the conversation flowed naturally among the three. Maddie asked 1,000 questions about life in Atlanta, showing genuine curiosity about the world beyond Blue Ridge. "What are the tall buildings like?" she asked with her eyes shining. "They're really tall, some have more than 20 floors, Savannah replied, remembering the buildings she saw when she went to the Capitol with her father. "And do they have elevators?" "Yes, they do. It's like a little box that takes you from one floor to another." "That's amazing. One day I want to see a big city like that." Caleb James smiled at his daughter's enthusiasm, but Savannah noticed a hint of melancholy in his gaze. He probably wished he could give Maddie that experience, but he knew his financial limitations. After dinner, Maddie showed Savannah her school notebooks and some drawings she had made. The girl was truly talented, especially in English and art. "You draw really well," Savannah praised sincerely, looking at a portrait Maddie had made of her father. "Thank you. I really like drawing. Sometimes I imagine what my mom might be like and try to draw her." The comment caught Caleb James off guard, and he exchanged a worried look with Savannah. It was the first time Maddie had mentioned her mother in front of a stranger. "It must be hard," Savannah said softly, "not having clear memories of her." "It is. Sometimes I get sad, but Daddy always says she's watching over me from somewhere else." Savannah felt her eyes well up. The girl's simplicity and faith touched her deeply. Here was a child who had lost her mother very early, yet still managed to maintain an optimistic view of life. When it was time to return to the guest house, Caleb James insisted on accompanying her into town. During the ride back, mounted on the horse again, they talked about the afternoon they had spent together. "Your daughter is special," Savannah said. "Very mature for her age, but she still keeps her childlike innocence." "She's my greatest pride," Caleb James replied. "Sometimes I worry about whether I'm giving her everything she needs, especially now that she's becoming a young lady." "From what I can see, you're doing an excellent job." She feels loved, and that's what matters most. Thank you for coming today. It's been a long time since I've seen Maddie so excited about someone's company. Savannah felt a pang of guilt. She was lying to these people who received her with such kindness. At the same time, for the first time in a long while, she truly felt welcome somewhere. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. When they arrived at the guest house, Caleb James helped her down from the horse. For a moment, they stood facing each other, a palpable tension in the air between them. "Anna," he said finally, "I know we haven't known each other long, but I'd like to see you again." Savannah's heart raced. She knew she was getting involved in a dangerous way, both for her and for him, but she couldn't resist the sincerity and kindness she saw in that man. "I'd like that too," she answered quietly. "Tomorrow is Saturday. If you want, you can come over for lunch with us. Maddie would be over the moon." "All right, I'll come." Caleb James smiled, and for the first time Savannah saw genuine happiness in his eyes. It was different from the polite cordiality he had shown until then. There was something deeper there. "See you tomorrow, then." "See you tomorrow." Savannah walked into the guest house with her heart racing. She was getting herself into a mess. But for the first time since she had run away from home, she felt truly happy. That night she had trouble sleeping, not out of fear this time, but from a mix of anxiety and anticipation she couldn't quite make sense of. She thought about Caleb James, about the tender way he treated his daughter, about the genuine simplicity with which he had welcomed her. At the same time, the guilt of lying ate away at her. She wasn't Anna, the secretary from Atlanta. She was Savannah Sterling, daughter of one of the most powerful and feared farmers in the region, and if her father found her, not only would she pay the consequences, but so would anyone who had helped her. At the Sterling estate, Colonel Arthur was growing increasingly irritable. Silas and the other men had searched all the neighboring towns without finding a trace of Savannah. It was as if she had simply vanished. "Colonel," Silas said hesitantly, "maybe it'd be best to call the police. They have more resources for searching." "No way!" Arthur slammed his fist on the table. "I'm not going to give the local gossips a reason to say I can't even control my own daughter. Keep looking. She couldn't have gone far." Mr. Preston Harrington arrived at the estate late in the evening, visibly annoyed. He was a 45-year-old man, well-dressed, but with an air of superiority that even Arthur found grating. "Arthur, I need you to resolve this situation quickly," he said bluntly. "I have important commitments in Chicago next week. I can't keep postponing indefinitely." "She'll turn up. It's just a spoiled girl's tantrum," the colonel replied, trying to maintain control of the situation. "I hope so, because if she won't cooperate willingly—" Preston left the sentence hanging, but his tone was enough to make it clear he wouldn't accept a refusal. Arthur felt a chill, realizing he might have underestimated his future son-in-law's temperament. But the deal was already done, and backing out now would be worse for his reputation than any resistance from his daughter. On Saturday morning, Savannah woke up eager for lunch at Caleb James's house. She chose a simple blouse and a skirt she had bought at the only clothing store in town, trying to better blend in with the rural setting. During breakfast at the guest house, Mrs. Martha noticed she seemed cheerier. "You seem better today, more rested." "Yeah, I'm feeling good here in town. People are very welcoming." "That's just how folks around here are. We may not have much, but what we have, we share." Savannah arrived at the farm at the agreed time and was greeted by Maddie with a warm hug. The girl had insisted on setting the table with the best tablecloth and the prettiest dishes they had at home. "I made sure to help Daddy prepare a special lunch," she said proudly. "Chicken and dumplings, rice, beans and a salad." "It smells delicious," Savannah praised sincerely. During lunch, the conversation was lively. Maddie talked about her plans for the school break, which would start in a few weeks. Caleb James mentioned he might be able to get a few days off too. "We always want to go somewhere different on vacation, but there's never enough money," Maddie commented without bitterness. just stating a fact. Sometimes the best outings are the ones close to home, Savannah said, trying to ease the situation. That's true. Last year we went camping by the creek right here on the farm. It was a lot of fun, Caleb James finished, ruffling his daughter's hair. After lunch, Maddie asked if she could show Savannah a special place she had discovered recently. The three of them walked to a small waterfall at the back of the property, hidden among trees and rocks. "What a beautiful place," Savannah exclaimed, genuinely impressed. "Nobody else knows it exists," Maddie said softly, as if she were revealing a big secret. "It's our little special spot." They sat on the rocks by the water's edge, and for a few moments they were silent, just enjoying the sound of the waterfall and the birdsong. Savannah felt more at peace than she had in years. "It's so different from city life," she commented. "Better or worse?" Caleb James asked. "Different, more peaceful." "Sometimes peace can be kind of boring," Maddie said. "Nothing very exciting happens here." Savannah smiled sadly. If the girl knew how much excitement she was trying to avoid, she might change her mind. During the afternoon, Caleb James showed Savannah how to take care of the horses. She showed a natural talent for handling the animals, which surprised him. "For someone who works in an office, you're pretty good with horses," he commented. "I've always liked animals," she replied, which was true. On her father's farm, she had always been more interested in the horses than the social activities expected of a young woman of her station. "You could teach Maddie to ride better. She's still a little scared." "I would love to," Savannah answered before thinking. Once again, she was committing to something she might not be able to fulfill. At the end of the afternoon, when it was time to head back to the city, Maddie made a request that moved everyone. "Anna, couldn't you come live here? We have a little room that we don't use for anything. You could stay, and we could be a real family." The silence that followed was filled with tension. Caleb James turned red with embarrassment at his daughter's boldness, but Savannah saw in his eyes that the idea didn't completely displease him. "Maddie, you can't say things like that," Caleb James said gently. "Anna has her life in Atlanta. She has her job. But she could find work here too," the girl insisted. "The school teacher said she's going to retire at the end of the year. Anna could be our new teacher." Savannah felt her heart tighten. The idea was too tempting, but impossible for so many reasons she didn't know where to begin explaining. "That's a beautiful thought, Maddie, but things aren't that simple," she finally said. "Big changes take time to plan." "But will you at least think about the possibility?" the girl insisted hopefully. "I'll think about it," Savannah promised, even though she knew it was an empty promise. During the ride back to the guest house, Caleb James apologized several times for his daughter's insistence. "She didn't mean any harm, it's just that, well, she really misses having a woman around the house, and by the looks of it, she really likes you." "I really like her too. And you," Savannah said softly, surprising herself with her own courage. Caleb James stopped the horse and turned to look her directly in the eyes. "Anna, I know we haven't known each other long, but I feel something special when I'm with you, something I haven't felt in a long time." Savannah's heart raced. She knew she should stop it right there, before it became something more complicated, but the words came out before she could control them. "I feel it too." He slowly brought his face close to hers, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. But Savannah didn't pull away. When their lips met, it was as if the whole world stopped. The kiss was soft, full of tenderness and unspoken promises. When they pulled apart, both had racing hearts and a mix of happiness and confusion in their eyes. "Anna," Caleb James began, but she put a finger to his lips. "Don't say anything now. Let's just feel." They finished the walk in silence, but it was a comfortable silence full of possibilities and expectations. When they arrived at Martha's guest house, Caleb James helped her down from the horse and held her hand for a few seconds before letting go. "Can I see you tomorrow?" he asked. "You can," she replied, knowing she was digging herself deeper into a complicated situation. That night, Savannah barely slept. The sensations of the kiss were still vivid in her memory, mixed with guilt for lying to a man who had been so sincere with her. She knew she had to tell the truth, but she was afraid of losing the first good thing that had happened in her life. On Sunday morning she went to Mass at the small-town church, more out of a need to reflect than out of religious devotion. The church was full, and she noticed several people looking at her with curiosity. It was natural, since she was a stranger in the small town. After Mass, several people came up to greet her and asked polite questions about her stay in town. She repeated the story about being a secretary from Atlanta, but each time she felt more uncomfortable with the lies. Caleb, James, and Maddie were also at church, and after Mass the girl ran to hug her. "Anna, I'm so glad you came to Mass. Now you can have lunch with us again," she said excitedly. "Maddie, stop that," Caleb James gently scolded. "Anna might have other plans." "Actually, I don't have any plans at all," Savannah replied. "If you'd like my company—" "We would," Maddie exclaimed before her father could answer. During Sunday lunch, the conversation was more intimate than on other days. Maddie, with the frankness typical of her age, asked questions that left everyone slightly embarrassed. "Anna, have you ever been married?" "Maddie," Caleb James scolded her. "It's okay," Savannah said. "No, I've never been married." "Why? You're pretty and nice. You must have had a bunch of suitors." Savannah laughed, but there was a hint of sadness in the sound. "Sometimes things don't happen at the right time." "And now? Is there someone special in your life?" the girl insisted, glancing none too subtly between Savannah and her father. "Maddie, enough questions," Caleb James said, clearly embarrassed. "It's fine," Savannah said. "No, there's no one special." After lunch, Maddie asked to go play with a little friend who lived on the neighboring farm, leaving Savannah and Caleb James alone for the first time since the kiss the night before. They walked to Maddie's secret waterfall, but this time the mood was different. There was a tension in the air, a mutual awareness of what had happened between them. "About last night," Caleb James began. "Did you regret it?" Savannah asked, fearing the answer. "No, I didn't regret it one bit. It was special to me," he said, looking directly at her. "It's been a long time since I felt this way." "It was special to me, too." They sat on the rock where they had been the day before, but now there was a physical closeness that hadn't existed before. Caleb James took Savannah's hand and intertwined his fingers with hers. "Anna, I know it might sound crazy, but I feel like I've known you for much longer. Like you've always been a part of my life." Savannah felt her eyes well up. She felt the same connection, but she knew it was built on lies on her part. "Cal, there are some things about me that you don't know." "Everyone has secrets," he said gently. "If it's important, you can tell me when you're comfortable. I'm in no hurry." His understanding and patience only made Savannah feel worse. He deserved to know the truth, but she was afraid of losing that moment of happiness she had found. "And what if I tell you something that changes everything between us?" Caleb James gently held her face in his hands. "Anna, look at me. No matter what you tell me, it won't change how I feel about you." She almost told him everything then, but was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Caleb James quickly stepped back and stood up, instinctively positioning himself between Savannah and whoever was coming. 3 men appeared among the trees, all on horseback with serious expressions on their faces. Savannah recognized one of them immediately. It was Silas, her father's foreman. Her blood ran cold. "Excuse me," Silas said to Caleb James. "We're looking for a young woman who went missing a few days ago. Blonde hair, light eyes, around 25 years old." Caleb James glanced at Savannah, noticing the sudden paleness in her face. "What kind of trouble did she cause?" he asked cautiously. "No trouble. She's the daughter of a local farmer. Her family is worried," Silas replied, but his eyes had already spotted Savannah behind Caleb James. "I haven't seen anyone matching that description," Caleb James lied without hesitation. Silas dismounted from his horse and took a few steps toward them. "That's strange, because I'm pretty sure I just saw exactly who we're looking for." Savannah's heart was pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. Caleb James sensed the tension and positioned himself more protectively. "Look here, friend, I don't know what you're talking about. This is Anna, a secretary from Atlanta who's visiting our area. She has nothing to do with the young woman you're looking for." Silas smiled unpleasantly. "Anna? What a coincidence. The young woman we're looking for is also named Savannah. Savannah Sterling, daughter of Colonel Arthur Sterling. The revelation hit Caleb James like a bucket of cold water. He slowly turned to Savannah, seeing the truth confirmed in her pale face. "Is it true?" he asked quietly. Savannah couldn't answer. Tears began to roll down her face as she watched all the trust and affection she had built with Caleb James crumble before her eyes. "Savannah Sterling," Silas said with satisfaction, "your father is very worried. You'd better come with us now without making a scene." "She's not going anywhere," Caleb James said firmly, even as he was still processing the revelation about Savannah's true identity. "Young man, you don't know what you're getting into," one of the other men said. "You'd better step aside and let us do our job." "Savannah," Caleb James turned to her, "is it true? Are you Colonel Sterling's daughter?" "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry, Cal. I wanted to tell you before, but—" "Enough talk," Silas interrupted. "Savannah, let's go. Your father is waiting, and so is Mr. Harrington." Hearing Preston's name, Savannah quickly stood up, wiping the tears from her face. "I'm not going back. I'm not marrying that man." "That's not your decision," Silas replied coldly. "Your father has given his word." Caleb James was trying to process everything that was happening. Savannah was the daughter of one of the most powerful men in the region, and she had lied about her identity from the very start. At the same time, he saw the real desperation in her eyes and realized she was running from something very serious. "Savannah," he said softly, "why didn't you tell me the truth?" "Because I knew you'd look at me differently. Everyone looks at me differently when they find out who my father is," she replied between sobs. "And because for the first time in my life I felt free to just be myself." Silas was losing patience. "Very nice, but that's enough now. Let's go before I have to use other methods." "What kind of methods?" Caleb James asked, stepping between Silas and Savannah again. "The kind you don't want to find out. Step aside, kid. This doesn't concern you." "If it concerns her, it concerns me too," Caleb James replied firmly. Savannah felt her heart clench even tighter. Even after finding out she had lied, Caleb James was still willing to protect her. "Cal, don't get involved. My father is capable of anything when he doesn't get what he wants." "She's right," Silas confirmed. "Colonel Sterling doesn't like people who stick their noses where they don't belong. You'd better forget you ever met this girl and move on with your life." "What if I don't want to forget?" Silas gave a sinister smile. "Then you'll have much bigger problems than losing your job." The threat was clear to everyone. Caleb James knew he was dealing with dangerous men, but he couldn't just abandon Savannah in that moment. "Savannah, do you want to go with them?" "No," she answered quietly. "But I don't have a choice." "Everyone has a choice." Silas was visibly annoyed by the delay. "Last time I'll ask nicely. Savannah, come with us now or things will get ugly for everyone." Savannah looked at Caleb James, seeing the determination in his eyes mixed with the hurt from finding out about her lies. She knew that if she kept resisting, Silas would carry out his threats, and Caleb James would pay the price. "I'll go," she said finally. "Savannah, don't—" "I have to go, Cal. I can't let you get hurt because of me." She stepped closer to him and gently touched his face with her hand. "I'm sorry I lied. I'm sorry for everything. You and Maddie are the best things that ever happened to me." Caleb James held her hand against his face. "This isn't over, Savannah. I'll find a way to help you." "No. Forget I ever existed. It's safer for you and Maddie." Silas stepped forward and grabbed Savannah's arm firmly. "Now then, let's go." As they walked away, Caleb James stood still, watching the woman he had learned to love being taken away against her will. The feeling of helplessness was devastating, but he knew that trying anything at that moment would be suicide. When they arrived at the Sterling estate, Savannah was taken straight to her father's office. Colonel Arthur was sitting behind an imposing desk, with Mr. Preston beside him, both wearing expressions of total disapproval. "I hope you enjoyed your childish little escapade," Arthur said coldly, "because it was the last freedom you'll have until the wedding." "Daddy, please listen to me. I can't marry him," Savannah pleaded. "You can and you will. I gave my word, and a Sterling's word is worth more than a spoiled girl's tantrum." Mr. Preston stood up and walked towards Savannah with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "My dear fiancé, I see we need to talk about some basic rules of our relationship." "We're not engaged. I never accepted this marriage," Savannah protested. "Your opinion is irrelevant. Your father has already accepted for you, and that's enough." The coldness in Preston's words made Savannah realize that her suspicions about his character were correct. That man saw her only as property to be acquired. "Savannah," Arthur continued, "you will stay in your room until the wedding. You will not leave the estate. You will not receive visitors, and you will not have access to a phone or internet. Perhaps then you'll learn your place." "This is false imprisonment." "This is discipline, something you should have received a long time ago." Savannah was escorted to her room by 2 estate employees who were ordered not to let her out for any reason. The door was locked from the outside, and she found herself effectively a prisoner in her own home. Sitting on the bed, she cried all the tears she had held back over the past few days, not only because of the situation she was in, but mainly because she had lost Caleb James in the worst possible way. He had discovered her lies at the worst moment, and now he probably hated her for deceiving him and Maddie. At Caleb James's house, Maddie had come back from her little friend's house and immediately noticed that her father was upset. "Dad, where's Savannah? I thought she was staying for dinner." Caleb James didn't know how to explain to his daughter what had happened. How could he tell her that the woman they had both grown fond of was the daughter of one of the most feared men in the region and was being forced into a marriage against her will? "She had to leave, sweetheart." "Leave for where?" "For Atlanta." "It's complicated, Maddie. She isn't exactly who we thought she was." Maddie noticed the sadness in her father's eyes and approached him with concern. "Did something bad happen?" Caleb James hugged his daughter and decided to tell at least part of the truth. "Savannah isn't a secretary from Atlanta. She's the daughter of a very powerful farmer and was running away from home because she didn't want to marry a man her father chose for her." "She lied to us?" Maddie asked, looking more confused than angry. "She lied, but not out of meanness. She was scared and needed help." "And now where is she?" "Her father came to get her. She had to go home." Maddie was silent for a few moments, processing the information. "Dad, can't we do anything to help her?" His daughter's question echoed exactly what Caleb James had been thinking ever since Savannah had been taken away. "I don't know, sweetheart. Her father is a very powerful man. People like us don't really have much of a chance against people like that. But if she's unhappy, we have to try to do something, right?" His daughter's moral simplicity touched Caleb James deeply. Maddie was right. If Savannah was being forced to do something against her will, they couldn't just accept it without trying to help. "You're right, Maddie. We can't abandon her." During the night, Caleb James stayed awake planning what he could do. He knew he didn't have the resources to confront Colonel Sterling directly, but maybe there were other ways to help Savannah. The next morning, he sought out Mr. Bennett, the owner of the farm where he worked. He was a fair and respected man in the region, and Caleb James hoped he could offer some advice. "Mr. Bennett, can I talk to you about a personal matter?" "Sure, Cal. Have a seat and tell me." Caleb James recounted the situation, omitting only the most intimate details of his relationship with Savannah. Mr. Bennett listened in silence, shaking his head from time to time. "Cal, you're getting yourself into a real mess. Colonel Sterling isn't a man to mess with." "I know, Mr. Bennett, but I can't just sit by and watch a woman be forced into a marriage against her will." "And what exactly do you plan to do?" "I don't know yet. That's why I came to ask for your advice, Mr. Bennett was thoughtful for a few minutes. "Legally, there's not much to do. The young lady is of age, but as long as she's in her father's house, he has authority over her, and the colonel has influence to handle any legal trouble that comes up." "So there's no way?" "I didn't say that, but whatever you do has to be very well thought out. One false move and you could lose a lot more than your job." Caleb James knew Mr. Bennett was right, but he couldn't simply give up. Savannah had stirred something in him that he hadn't felt in years, and the idea of leaving her in the hands of a man who clearly didn't respect her was unacceptable. "Mr. Bennett, do you know this Mr. Harrington who's going to marry her?" I know him by name. He's a lawyer from Savannah, has a big office there. I've heard a few things about him that I didn't like. What kind of things? Stories about how he treats women. Nothing proven, but too much smoke for there not to be a fire. The information made Caleb James's blood boil. If the suspicions were true, Savannah was being handed over to a potentially dangerous man. Mr. Bennett, if I found something incriminating about this Preston, something that could stop the wedding, would you help me? The farmer looked at Caleb James for a long moment. Cal, are you sure you want to get mixed up in this? Because once you start, there's no turning back. I'm sure. Then I'll help you, but we'll have to be very careful. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, be sure to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. Meanwhile, at the Sterling estate, Savannah spent her days locked in her room, desperate and without hope. Meals were brought by maids who had orders not to talk to her. Her only company were the books in the room and the torturous thoughts of Caleb James and Maddie. On the third day of her confinement, she heard voices in the hallway. It was her father talking to someone about wedding preparations. The ceremony was set for a week from then, and all the arrangements were being made without any consultation with her. Are you sure she won't try to run away again? She heard Preston's voice ask. I have trusted men making sure that doesn't happen, and after the wedding she'll be your problem, Arthur replied. She won't be a problem for long. I've already made clear to her what the expected behavior will be. The conversation made Savannah feel sick. They talked about her as if she were an animal to be tamed. Her determination to find a way to escape only grew stronger. Caleb James, for his part, had begun his own investigation into Mr. Preston Harrington. Using the contacts Mr. Bennett had in the area, he started talking discreetly with people who knew the lawyer. What he found was not encouraging. Several people mentioned rumors about Preston's violent temper, especially with women. A secretary who had worked in his office told stories of yelling, humiliation, and inappropriate behavior. He fired 3 secretaries last year, the woman said. He always came up with an excuse, but everyone knew it was because they refused to accept his advances. Caleb James felt his blood boil, but he knew he needed something more concrete than rumors. That was when Mr. Bennett suggested talking to Mr. Harrison, a lawyer friend of his who worked in the same city as Preston. Mr. Harrison, I need to know a few things about a colleague of yours, Preston Harrington. It's a bit delicate, but it's important. Mr. Harrison, an upright man in his 60s, looked uncomfortable with the question. Why the interest? Is he giving you trouble? Caleb James explained the situation, asking for absolute discretion. Mr. Harrison listened with growing attention. Cal, I can't give you details for ethical reasons, but I can tell you there have been complaints against Preston before the Bar Association. Nothing that's led to a lawsuit so far, but what kind of complaints? The kind involving harassment and assault. If you're trying to protect someone from him, you're doing the right thing. The confirmation of the suspicions gave Caleb James the extra motivation he needed. It was no longer just a matter of the heart, but also of protection. Savannah truly was in danger. On the 4th day of her imprisonment, Savannah received an unexpected visit. It was Hattie, an older maid who had worked at the farm for over 20 years and had practically raised Savannah when she was a child. Girl, what kind of situation have you gotten yourself into? Hattie said quietly, checking that no one was listening. Hattie, so good to see you. I'm desperate here. Your father is furious. I've never seen him like this, and this man you're going to marry. Girl, there's something about him that doesn't sit right with me. That's why I ran away, Hattie. I can't marry him. The older woman leaned in and whispered, Listen, last night I overheard a conversation between your father and Mr. Preston Harrington. They were talking about after the wedding, about how he was going to educate you properly. Savannah's blood ran cold. What else did you hear? He said a woman needs to learn to obey from an early age, and that if you gave him trouble, he knew how to handle it. Your father laughed and said that Sterling women are stubborn, but that in the end they always give in. The revelation confirmed Savannah's worst fears. If she married Preston, she'd be giving herself to a man who clearly intended to control her by force if necessary. Hattie, can you help me? How, girl? Your father has everyone keeping an eye on you. I can't even get close without having to explain myself. If I find a way to send a message to someone, can you deliver it? Hattie hesitated, knowing that helping Savannah could cost her her job. To who? To a man named Caleb James. He works at Bennett's farm. The ranch hand with a little girl. You know him? I do. He came by yesterday looking for extra work, said he needed money urgently. Savannah's heart raced. Caleb James had looked for work at her father's ranch. It was too risky, but at the same time it meant he hadn't given up on her. Did he get the job? Your father sent Silas to hire him for some fence work. He'll be working here this week. Savannah felt a mix of hope and terror. Caleb James was trying to get close to help her, but if he were discovered, the consequences would be terrible. Hattie, if you can talk to him, tell him I'm okay, but that the situation is worse than he imagines. Tell him that I didn't lie about my feelings for him. Girl, are you sure you want to get mixed up with this boy? He seems like a good guy, but your situation is way too complicated. He's the only good thing that's happened in my life, Hattie. If I have to marry Preston, at least I want Cal to know the truth. Hattie promised to try to pass along the message if she got the chance. When she left, Savannah felt a mix of hope and worry. Knowing that Caleb James was nearby made her feel less alone, but she also feared what might happen to him. Caleb James had actually gotten the job at Sterling Estate through Mr. Bennett, who had connections with Silas. The story was that he needed extra money to pay some bills, which wasn't a lie, just not the whole truth. On his first day of work, he stayed alert to everything happening around him, trying to find out where Savannah was being kept and how he could help her. The ranch was big and heavily guarded, with several men working as undercover security. During lunch, he managed to talk to some of the older employees, trying to get information about Savannah's situation. Poor girl, one of the cooks commented quietly, locked in her room like she's a criminal, and all because she doesn't want to marry that man. Do you know the fiancé? Caleb asked casually. I don't know him, but I've seen him here a few times. I didn't like his attitude at all. Very arrogant, treats everyone like they're beneath him. And Savannah, how is she handling the situation? The cook looked around to make sure no one was listening. Hattie, who takes care of the house, says the girl is desperate. She's not eating right, not sleeping. It's a tragedy. The news made Caleb James's heart tighten. He needed to find a way to communicate with Savannah and figure out how he could help her. The opportunity came on the second day when Hattie approached him during the lunch break. Are you Caleb James? I am. Why? I have a message from Savannah for you. His heart raced, but he tried to stay calm. What message? She said she's all right, but that the situation is worse than you think, and she also said that she wasn't lying about her feelings for you. Caleb James felt a mix of relief and worry. Relief from knowing Savannah still cared about him, and worry because she'd said the situation was worse than he imagined. Can you take a reply to her? I can try, but it's dangerous. If they catch me. Just say that I haven't given up on her, and that I'm trying to find a way to help. Hattie agreed, and quickly walked away. Caleb James spent the rest of the day working on the fences, but his mind was focused on finding a way to get Savannah out of that situation. At Mr. Bennett's house that night, Caleb James reported what he had found out. The farmer listened closely, shaking his head with concern. The situation is more complicated than I thought, Cal. The colonel isn't just forcing the marriage, he's keeping his daughter under house arrest. That's not legal, is it? Technically no, but who's going to report it? And even if someone does, he has enough influence to fix the problem quickly. Caleb James felt frustrated by the powerlessness of the situation. It seemed like there was no legal way to help Savannah. That was when Mr. Harrison showed up with information that would change everything. Cal, remember you asked me about Preston Harrington? I do. Well, I did some discreet investigating and found out something interesting. There's a woman in Chicago who was preparing a complaint against him for assault, but she dropped it because he intimidated her. A complaint for assault? She was engaged to him 2 years ago. According to her, he abused her physically and psychologically, but he always managed to convince her that it was her fault. When she finally decided to end the engagement and report him, he used his influence to make her life a living hell. Would she be willing to talk to us? Maybe, if she knows she can help another woman avoid going through what she went through. Caleb James felt a spark of hope. If they could prove that Ricardo had a history of violence against women, maybe they could stop the marriage. How do we get in touch with her? I'll try to make contact, but Cal, even if she agrees to help, it's still going to be a tough fight. Colonel Sterling won't give up easily. I know, but it's better to try than to let Savannah marry a man who'll make her life a living hell. On the 5th day of work at the Sterling estate, Caleb James finally got to see Savannah. She appeared briefly at the bedroom window while he was working on a fence near the main house. The exchange of glances lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough for both of them to feel all the longing and worry they were carrying. Savannah had lost weight in the past few days, and Caleb James saw in her eyes a mix of hope and despair that broke his heart. She made a subtle gesture with her hand, as if saying, "I love you," and he responded in kind before she disappeared from the window. That night, Hattie managed to pass along another message. She wants to know if you found out anything that could help. The wedding is the day after tomorrow, and she's desperate. Tell her we're working on something, but she needs to hold on a little longer. And if there's not enough time, if they really force the wedding. Caleb James hesitated. He still wasn't sure the plan with Preston's ex-fiancée would work, and time was running out. Tell her that if I have to, I'll stop the wedding right in the middle of the ceremony. Have you lost your mind? They'll kill you. Better to die trying than live knowing I abandoned her. The determination in Caleb James's voice was so strong that Hattie realized it was useless to try to talk him out of it. Mr. Harrison managed to contact Brooke, Preston's ex-fiancée. She was initially reluctant to get involved, but when she found out another woman was about to marry him against her will, she agreed to help. "He's a monster," she said during the phone call. "It started with verbal humiliation, then escalated to shoving slaps. He said he was teaching me to be a proper wife." "Would you be willing to give a written statement? Maybe come here to testify? If it's to stop him from doing to another woman what he did to me, I'll do anything." Brooke arrived in Blue Ridge the day before the wedding, bringing not only her statement, but also photos of the abuse and intimidating messages Preston had sent after she broke off the engagement. "That's enough material to at least raise serious doubts about his character," Mr. Harrison assessed. "But how do we use it? The wedding is tomorrow morning. We'll have to go straight to Colonel Sterling, show him the evidence, and hope he changes his mind when he finds out what kind of man he's giving his daughter to." Caleb James wasn't very optimistic that Colonel Arthur would care about evidence of violence from his future son-in-law, but it was the only chance they had. On the morning of the wedding, the Sterling estate was in a flurry of preparations. Guests were arriving from all over the region, and the makeshift chapel in the garden of the main house was decorated with white flowers and gold ribbons. Savannah was forced to get dressed for the wedding under the supervision of 2 maids who had orders not to leave her alone for a single minute. The wedding dress had been chosen by her father, a traditional and conservative model that had nothing to do with her taste. "Please," she begged the maids, "can't you help me? You know I don't want this." "Girl, there's nothing we can do," one of them replied with pity. "Our orders are to get you ready and take you to the chapel." Meanwhile, Caleb James, Mr. Bennett, Mr. Harrison, and Brooke were heading to the Sterling estate. They had decided to arrive moments before the ceremony, when there would be more people, and it would be harder for the colonel to take drastic measures. "Remember," Mr. Harrison instructed, "we'll stay calm and present the facts clearly. Our only chance is to convince the colonel that he's making a mistake." When they arrived at the estate, security tried to block their entrance, but Mr. Bennett had enough influence in the region to get them through. They were taken to where Colonel Arthur was supervising the final preparations. "Bennett, what a surprise! I didn't know you were coming to the wedding," the colonel said coldly. "Arthur, we need to talk. It's about your daughter's wedding. The wedding is perfect, it doesn't need anything." "Yes, it does. Do you know what kind of man Preston Harrington is?" The colonel looked suspiciously at the group. "I know he's a successful lawyer and that he'll be a good husband for my daughter. This young lady here," Mr. Bennett gestured to Brooke, "is his ex-fiancée. She has some things to tell you." Brooke stepped forward, clearly nervous but determined. "Mr. Sterling, I was involved with Preston for 2 years. He physically and psychologically abused me the whole time. I have proof of what I'm saying." The colonel looked at her with disdain. "And why should I believe a stranger who shows up here on the eve of my daughter's wedding? Doctor." Arthur showed the photos and documents that Brooke had brought, because she has evidence, photos of the assaults, threatening messages, medical reports. The colonel examined the documents quickly, but his expression didn't change. "Even if that's true, it doesn't change anything. My daughter is going to learn to be an obedient wife." The response shocked even Caleb James, who had already expected a bad reaction. "Colonel," Mr. Bennett tried again, "your daughter could be in real danger. That man has a history of violence. My daughter needs discipline. If Preston can give her that, all the better." Caleb James couldn't hold back anymore. "You're handing your own daughter over to an abuser. How can you do that?" The colonel turned to him with cold eyes. "And who are you to question my decisions?" "Someone who genuinely cares about Savannah." "Ah, so you're the pawn who was helping my daughter in her rebellion. Silas told me about you." The tension in the air was palpable. Caleb James knew he had exposed himself, but he didn't regret it. "Yes, that's me, and I'm not going to let you force her to marry a violent man." The colonel laughed coldly. "You're not going to let me? And what exactly do you plan to do to stop me?" Before Caleb James could answer, the sound of music began to play in the chapel. The ceremony was about to begin. "Gentlemen," the colonel said, "I suggest you leave before I call security." "We're not leaving," Caleb James said firmly. "Then you'll have to watch my daughter marry the man I chose for her." In the chapel, all the guests were seated, waiting for the bride's entrance. Preston was at the altar with a satisfied smile, adjusting his shirt cuffs. He saw this wedding as a double victory. He was acquiring a young, beautiful wife and making a politically advantageous alliance with Colonel Sterling. Savannah was brought to the entrance of the chapel by the same men who had ensured her confinement during the week. She was pale and visibly shaken, but tried to maintain a dignified appearance. When the chapel doors opened and the wedding march began to play, all the guests stood up. Savannah began to walk toward the altar with slow, reluctant steps. It was then that Caleb James, who had managed to enter the chapel mingled with the other farm workers, stood up in the middle of the ceremony. "I object to this wedding," he shouted, making all the guests turn to look at him. The silence that followed was deathly. Savannah stopped in the middle of the aisle, tears in her eyes, as she saw Caleb James there. Preston turned red with rage, and Colonel Arthur looked ready to explode. "This woman is being forced into marriage against her will," Caleb James continued, ignoring the shocked murmurs of the guests. "And the man they want to marry her to has a history of violence against women." "Get this man out of here," the colonel shouted at the security guards. But before they could act, Brooke also stood up. "It's true," she shouted. "Preston Harrington abused me for 2 years. I have proof." Mr. Harrison also stood up, showing the documents. "The evidence is all here." "This man is dangerous." Confusion took over the chapel. Some guests began questioning what was happening. Others tried to discreetly leave. Preston tried to protest his innocence, but his nervousness was obvious. In the middle of the chaos, Savannah looked directly at Caleb James. "Cal," she whispered. He walked toward her, ignoring the colonel's shouts and the men trying to stop him. "Savannah, do you want to marry him?" "No," she answered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I don't want to marry him." "Then you won't." Caleb James took her hand and began walking toward the exit of the chapel. The colonel ordered the security guards to detain them, but several guests, shocked by the revelations about Preston, began to question what was really going on there. Arthur, one of the most influential guests in the region, stood up. "If these accusations are true, you are making a very serious mistake." "They're lies," the colonel insisted, but his voice no longer carried its usual authority. Preston, realizing the situation was spiraling out of control, tried to justify himself. "These people are liars. They're trying to sabotage our wedding for ulterior motives." But Brooke approached him with the photos of her injuries in her hands. "Explain these photos then. Explain the threats you made to me." Seeing the physical evidence of the abuse, several guests were shocked. Preston's reputation began to crumble before everyone's eyes. "I won't accept these slanders," Preston shouted, but his outrage sounded hollow even to himself. Mr. Harrison approached with more documents. "They aren't slanders. We have medical reports, text messages, witnesses. Everything is documented." The weight of the evidence was undeniable. Even some of the Colonel's allies began to discreetly distance themselves, not wanting to be associated with the situation. "Colonel," Mr. Bennet said calmly, "I think it's time to put an end to this. Your daughter has made it clear she doesn't want to get married, and now we have evidence that the groom isn't who you thought he was." Arthur looked around the chapel, watching his authority and reputation unravel before his eyes. The public humiliation was exactly what he had tried to avoid, but his own actions had led precisely to that. Savannah, still holding hands with Caleb James, looked at her father with a mixture of pity and sadness. "Dad, why can't you understand that I just want to be happy?" "Happy?" He practically spat the word, "with a penniless ranch hand. With a man who respects me and truly loves me." The simplicity of the answer seemed to disarm the Colonel for a moment. He looked at his daughter, seeing for the first time not the rebellious property that needed to be controlled, but a grown woman who had the right to choose her own destiny. Preston, realizing he had completely lost control of the situation, made a desperate attempt to save face. "Savannah, you're making a mistake. That man can't give you what I can." "He can give me respect and love," she replied without hesitation. "That's all I need. Love doesn't pay the bills. Love doesn't give social status. I'd rather be happy and poor than rich and unhappy." Savannah's declaration echoed through the silent chapel. It was a clear choice between two completely different worlds, and she had chosen love over money. Caleb James squeezed her hand, feeling both proud of her courage and apprehensive about what would come next. "Savannah," he said softly, "are you sure this is what you want? Because once we leave here, there's no turning back." "I've never been so sure of anything in my life." They began walking again toward the exit, but were stopped by the Colonel's broken voice. "Savannah, if you walk out of here now, don't count on me anymore. You won't have a home, you won't have a family, you won't have anything." She stopped and turned to look at him one last time. "Dad, I always wanted your approval. I always tried to be the daughter you wanted. But I can't live a lie anymore. If you accept me as I am with my choices, I will always be your daughter. But if you can't do that, then it really is better for me to leave." The words were both a final plea and a farewell. The Colonel remained silent, struggling between his wounded pride and his love for his daughter. When he didn't answer, Savannah nodded sadly. "So that's it. Goodbye, Dad." She and Caleb James walked to the chapel door under the gaze of all the guests. Some looked shocked, others seemed to approve of her courage. Preston was visibly humiliated, and the Colonel remained motionless, watching his daughter walk away from him, perhaps forever. Outside the chapel, Mr. Bennet, Mr. Harrison, and Brooke were waiting for them. "You did it," Brooke said with tears in her eyes. "She escaped the same fate I almost had." "And now?" Savannah asked, still processing everything that had happened. "I have nowhere to go, no money. I have nothing." "You have us," Caleb James said firmly. "As long as I have anything, you will too. And you have friends," Mr. Bennet added. "People who respect your courage and will help with whatever's needed." Mr. Harrison approached Savannah. "Young lady, if you want to study law, I can help you get a scholarship. A woman with your determination can make a difference in the lives of many others." The offer caught Savannah off guard. She had never thought about becoming a lawyer, but the idea of using her experience to help other women in similar situations was appealing. I'd like to think about it." "Of course, the offer stands." They headed into town, but before leaving the property, Savannah asked Caleb James to stop the car. She got out and looked at the farm where she had grown up one last time. It was the end of one life and the beginning of another, completely different. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time she felt free to find out. Caleb James got out of the car and stood beside her. "Do you regret it?" "No." "Scared, yes. Regretful, never. It's all going to work out. We're going to make it work." Savannah smiled for the first time in weeks. I know it will. Mostly because I'm not alone. They got back in the car and headed for Blue Ridge, where a new life awaited them. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be honest, built on love and mutual respect. At Caleb James's house, Maddie was waiting anxiously. When she saw Savannah getting out of the car, still dressed as a bride, the girl ran to hug her. "Anna, you're here. Dad said you might not be able to come." "I'm here, Maddie, and if you want, I'll stay." "Forever?" Savannah looked at Caleb James, who nodded with a smile. Forever. The adjustment to the new life wasn't simple. Savannah had to learn to live with far fewer resources than she was used to, but she discovered that simplicity had its own pleasures. She and Caleb James got married in a simple ceremony at the church in Blue Ridge, with only a few close friends present. Mr. Harrison kept his promise and secured a scholarship for Savannah. She began studying law remotely, focusing on family law and domestic violence. Her own experience gave her a unique perspective on her studies. Maddie blossomed with the presence of a loving mother figure in the house. Savannah discovered she had a natural talent for teaching and started giving private lessons to supplement the family's income. 2 years after the failed marriage, Savannah had graduated from law school and opened a small office in Blue Ridge, specializing in cases of domestic violence and women's rights. Many of the clients she served were women in situations similar to what she had experienced. Caleb James continued working on Mr. Bennett's farm, which had become almost like a father to him. Over time, he managed to save enough to buy a small piece of land, where he started raising his own cattle. Savannah's relationship with her father remained severed. Colonel Arthur never got over what he saw as a betrayal and public humiliation. He had tried to stay in touch a few times, but always made reconciliation conditional on her leaving Caleb James, which Savannah categorically refused to accept. Preston Harrington had left the area after the wedding scandal. The evidence presented by Brooke had resulted in an investigation that uncovered other cases of assault. He lost his license to practice law, and his reputation was in ruins. Brooke became a close friend of the family, visiting them regularly. She had moved to a nearby town and worked as a consultant for organizations that helped women who were victims of violence. On a Sunday afternoon, 3 years after the wedding that never happened, Savannah was 6 months pregnant and helping Maddie, now 15 years old, with her math homework. Caleb James came home from work and found the 2 women in his life focused on their studies. "How are my princesses?" he asked, kissing first Savannah and then Maddie on the forehead. "Dad, I'm not a princess anymore." "I'm 15, Maddie protested, but she smiled. "To me, you'll always be my little princess." Savannah smiled, watching the interaction between father and daughter. Maddie had become a confident and intelligent teenager with plans to study medicine. Their relationship had developed naturally, without forcing anything, and now Maddie truly saw Savannah as a second mother. "How was work today?" Savannah asked Caleb James. "Good. Mr. Bennett said they'll start building the new house on our lot next week." Their own home was a dream they had been building together for 2 years. It would be simple, but adequate for the growing family. Savannah had insisted on being involved in the project, including details that would make the house accessible for people with disabilities, thinking about the clients she sometimes had to meet at home. "And at the office? How were your cases today?" Caleb James asked, genuinely interested in his wife's work. "I got a protective order for Carla." The judge finally understood the seriousness of the situation. Carla was a 22-year-old young woman who was being stalked by her ex-boyfriend. Savannah had worked on the case for 3 months, gathering evidence and building a solid argument for the client's protection. "That's great." She must be relieved. She was. She cried a lot when she got the news. These were the moments that made all the sacrifice worth it for Savannah. Every woman she helped was like a small victory against the kind of man who had tried to control her own life. During dinner, Maddie asked a question that surprised both adults. "Savannah, don't you miss the life you had before? The farm, the money, those things?" Savannah thought for a moment before answering. "Sometimes I miss some comforts, I won't lie. It was easier having money to solve problems. But I don't miss the life itself, because in that life, I wasn't myself." "What do you mean?" Back there I had to be what my father wanted me to be. Here I can be who I really am. And who are you really? A woman who likes helping others, who loves her family, and who believes everyone deserves to be happy. Caleb James held his wife's hand over the table. And a brave woman who's not afraid to fight for what she believes in. I learned that from you two, Savannah replied. Cal, you taught me that true love is based on respect and partnership. And you, Maddie, you taught me that family isn't just blood. It's who we choose to love and care for. The girl smiled, clearly moved by the words. So we're a real family? The realest there is. That night, after Maddie went to sleep, Caleb James and Savannah stayed on the porch of the small house, looking at the stars and talking about the future. Cal, sometimes I wonder if I did the right thing dragging you into my problems, Savannah said. How can you say that? You didn't drag me into anything. I chose to help you, I chose to love you, I chose to stay with you. But if I had kept quiet that first day, you and Maddie would be living in peace, without complications. Anna, listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. He turned to look her directly in the eyes. Before I met you, I was just surviving, taking care of Maddie, working, fulfilling obligations, but I wasn't really living. And now? Now I wake up every day, happy to have you by my side. I see Maddie more confident and sure of herself. I have plans for the future that go beyond just surviving another day. Savannah felt her eyes well up. Are you sure you don't regret it? The only thing I regret is not having met you sooner. They were silent for a few minutes, simply enjoying the tranquility of the night and each other's company. Cal, can I tell you something? Of course. I've been thinking about trying to contact my father again. Caleb James was surprised. In the 3 years since the failed marriage, Anna had mentioned her father only a few times and always with sadness. Why? Did something specific make you think about that? The pregnancy, I guess. I keep thinking that our child should know their grandfather, and that maybe my father has changed his mind about our situation. And if he hasn't changed, if he still demands that you choose between him and our family, then at least I'll know I tried. I don't want our child to grow up not knowing half the family because of pride. Caleb James understood his wife's inner conflict. He himself missed his father, whom he had lost at a young age, and knew how important it was for a child to have contact with their grandparents. If that's what you want, I support you, but promise me you won't blame yourself if he's not ready to accept our family. I promise. A few days later, Anna wrote a letter to her father. It wasn't easy to find the right words, but she tried to be honest about her feelings without sounding accusatory. Dad, I know our last conversation didn't end well, and that the things I said must have hurt you as much as your words hurt me. But I'm writing because despite everything, you're still my father and I still love you. I'm 4 months pregnant, and my greatest wish is for my child to know their grandfather. Caleb James and I have built a good life here, based on love and respect. I don't have the material wealth I had before, but I have peace and happiness. If you'd like to meet our family, you'll be very welcome. If you still can't accept my choices, I'll understand, but I won't stop trying. With love, Anna. The letter was sent, but for 2 weeks there was no response. Anna tried not to get anxious, but it was impossible not to wonder if her father had received the letter and what he had thought. The response came unexpectedly. On a Saturday afternoon, while Anna and Maddie were in the backyard hanging clothes, a familiar car approached the house. It was Colonel Arthur's car. Anna, isn't that... Maddie began. It's my father, Anna confirmed, feeling her heart race. Caleb James came out of the house when he heard the engine noise. The three of them stood still, watching the car stop and the Colonel slowly get out. Arthur Sterling seemed to have aged more than the 3 years that had passed. His hair was completely white, and there was a hunch in his back that hadn't been there before. He approached slowly, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Anna, he said simply. Dad, she replied, wiping her hands on her apron. There was a moment of awkward silence where no one knew exactly what to say. Finally, the Colonel looked at his daughter's slightly protruding belly. So it's true. You're pregnant. I am. 4.5 months. He nodded slowly, then looked at Caleb James. You're the man she chose. I am. "And you are welcome in our home," Caleb James replied with courtesy but firmness. Colonel Sterling studied Caleb James for a moment, as if trying to understand what his daughter had seen in him. May I come in? I'd like to talk to you both." Savannah exchanged a glance with Caleb James, who nodded discreetly. "Of course, Daddy. Come in." The house was small but cozy, very different from the mansion where Savannah had grown up. Colonel Sterling looked around, noticing the details that showed a happy family: smiling photos on the wall, Maddie's books scattered across the table, plants cared for with affection. "Maddie, this is my father, Colonel Arthur Sterling." Savannah made the introductions. "Daddy, this is Madeline, Caleb James's daughter." "Nice to meet you, sir," Maddie said politely, but keeping a certain distance. "The pleasure is mine, young lady." They sat down in the small living room, and silence reigned again for a few moments. "Savannah," the colonel finally spoke, "I received your letter. And I thought a lot about what you wrote, about what happened that day at the chapel." He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "Daddy, you don't need to say anything you don't truly feel. I just wanted you to know that our door is open. No, I need to say it. I need to talk about the mistakes I made." The admission surprised everyone in the room. "I was so worried about my reputation, about what people would think, that I forgot what really mattered. Your happiness." Savannah felt her eyes well up, but she said nothing. "That man, Mr. Preston Harrington. After you left, we found out other things about him. Things even worse than what you had revealed." "What kind of things?" "He had defrauded some clients, was being investigated for money laundering, and more women came forward whom he had assaulted." Caleb James gently squeezed Savannah's hand. "I'm glad you found out in time not to get involved with him," Savannah said. "Savannah, I almost handed my daughter over to a criminal because I was more worried about business than your well-being." The emotion in the colonel's voice was evident. "Daddy, let me finish. These 3 years have been the worst of my life, not because I lost business or prestige, but because I lost my daughter. You were the most important thing I had, and I threw it all away out of pride." The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. "I don't know if you can forgive me, but I wanted you to know that I admit my mistakes, and that if you allow it, I'd like to get to know my son-in-law and my granddaughter, and to be present when my grandson is born." Savannah couldn't hold back her tears anymore. "Of course I forgive you, Daddy. You're my father. I always wanted us to be a family." The colonel stood up and hesitantly opened his arms. Savannah stood up too and hugged him for the first time in 3 years. They both cried, releasing years of hurt and longing. Caleb James and Maddie watched the reconciliation, moved. When father and daughter separated, the colonel turned to Caleb James. "Son, I can't say I approve of all my daughter's choices, but I can see that she's happy, and that you take good care of her. That's the most important thing in my life, sir, her and our children." "Our children?" "Maddie has been my daughter in my heart for 3 years, and now we're having another baby." The colonel looked at Maddie with renewed interest. "So you're my granddaughter too?" "If you want me to be," Maddie replied shyly. "Of course I do. I've always wanted grandkids." The afternoon passed with conversations about the last 3 years. The colonel told them about how the farm had changed, about the business he had lost, and about how the house had felt empty without Savannah. She in turn talked about her studies, her work as a lawyer, and how she had built a new life. "You graduated in law?" the colonel asked, impressed. "I did, specializing in family law and domestic violence." "And do you have your own office?" "It's small, but it's mine. I mostly take on women in difficult situations." The pride in her voice was evident, and the colonel realized he had underestimated his daughter's determination. "And you, young man?" He turned to Caleb James. "How are you supporting yourself?" "I work at Bennett's farm, and I'm buying a piece of land where I plan to raise cattle. It's not much, but it's enough to live with dignity. Mr. Bennett is an honorable man. If he trusts you, that's a good reference." When it was time for the colonel to leave, the atmosphere was much lighter than when he had arrived. "Can I come back another time?" he asked hesitantly. You can, and you should, Savannah replied. This is your home too. And when the baby is born, I want to be there if you'll allow me. Of course, Dad. After he left, the family stayed on the porch talking about the unexpected visit. I didn't expect him to be capable of apologizing, Savannah admitted. People can change, Caleb James said, especially when they realize what really matters in life. I liked him, Maddie commented. It seems like he truly repented. I think so too, and I'm glad our child will get to know their grandfather. In the following months, Colonel Arthur became a regular presence in the family's life. He came at least once a week, always bringing some gift for Maddie or something for the baby that was on the way. The relationship between him and Caleb James evolved slowly, but positively. The colonel began to respect his son-in-law as he saw how he took care of his daughter and how devoted he was to the family. Caleb James, in turn, recognized his father-in-law's genuine effort to make amends for past mistakes. When Savannah went into labor, the colonel was at the farm handling some business, but he dropped everything to rush to the hospital. He arrived in time to be one of the first to meet his grandson, a boy who was named Arthur Caleb, a tribute to both grandfathers. He's a strong boy, the colonel said emotionally, holding his grandson in his arms for the first time. He's going to be a man of character like his father. The statement moved Caleb James, who finally felt fully accepted by his father-in-law. 2 years after the grandson's birth, the family's life had completely stabilized. They were living in the new house they had built on their own land. Savannah's law firm had grown and gained a good reputation in the region, and Caleb James had become Mr. Bennett's partner in cattle raising. Colonel Arthur had become a present and loving grandfather, spoiling the two children, but respecting the parents' decisions. He had also become a discreet supporter of Savannah's work, sometimes referring clients who needed legal help. One Sunday afternoon, the whole family was gathered at the new house for the Sunday lunch that had become a tradition. Maddie, now 18 and about to start medical school, was playing with her younger brother in the backyard, while the adults talked on the porch. "Savannah, can I ask you a question?" the colonel said. "Of course, Dad." "Are you happy? Truly happy?" Savannah looked around, seeing her husband talking to Maddie about her college plans, her son playing carefree in the yard, her modest home full of love. "I am, Dad. Happier than I ever imagined I could be." "And do you regret anything? Not even the things you lost when you left the farm?" "The only things that truly mattered I brought with me. My dignity, my freedom of choice, and my self-respect. The rest was just stuff." The colonel nodded thoughtfully. "You know I understand that now, right? That you made the right choice?" "I do, and that means a lot to me. It means a lot to me too. Seeing that I raised a daughter strong enough to fight for her happiness, even when that meant standing up to me." Caleb James approached them at that moment, carrying their son in his arms. "What are you two talking about with such serious faces?" "We were talking about choices," Savannah replied, taking the son from her husband's arms, "and about how sometimes the hardest choices are the right ones." "That's true," Caleb James agreed. "That day on the road when I saw you with your broken-down car, I could have just driven past. It would have been easier, safer." "So why didn't you?" "Because something told me you were going to be important in my life. I didn't know how or why, but I knew I couldn't just leave you there." "And today?" "Today, I know it was the best decision I ever made." Savannah smiled, remembering that first meeting on the dusty road. It felt like a lifetime ago, but at the same time, it seemed like yesterday. "You know what's funny?" she said. "That day, I was running away from what I thought would be the worst day of my life, but it was actually the start of the best time I've ever had." "Life has its ironies sometimes," the colonel commented. "We spend our whole lives trying to control everything, and in the end, we find out that the best things come when we stop trying to control and let the heart lead." Maddie approached at that moment, a mischievous look on her face. "Can I interrupt this philosophical conversation to make an announcement?" "Of course, sweetheart. What is it?" "Well, you guys know I'm starting med school next month, right?" "We know, and we're very proud," Savannah replied. "And you know I'm going to study in Atlanta, which is far from here." "We know that too," Caleb James said, already guessing where his daughter was going with this. "So, I was thinking, how about you guys have another baby so I have someone to play with when I come home for break?" The question caught everyone off guard. Caleb James turned red, Savannah laughed, and the Colonel nearly choked on his coffee. "Maddie," Caleb James protested. "What? It's a valid suggestion. Little Arthur is going to be alone when I go off to college, and I've always wanted more siblings." Savannah and Caleb James exchanged knowing looks. Actually, they had already talked about the possibility of having another child, but they hadn't expected Maddie to bring up the subject so directly. "We'll see how things unfold," Savannah said diplomatically. "That's the spirit," Maddie clapped her hands. "That means you'll try. That means you're very nosy," Caleb James said, ruffling his daughter's hair. "Nosy and happy," she corrected. "Happy to have the family I have." "We're happy too," Savannah said, hugging Maddie. "Very happy." As the sun set that Sunday afternoon, the family continued talking on the porch of the house they had built together. It wasn't a big or luxurious house, but it was full of love, laughter, and stories to tell. Savannah thought about how her life had changed since that day on the road. She had traded material wealth for emotional wealth, social status for true love, financial security for freedom of choice, and she regretted nothing. 6 months later, Maddie was in her first semester of med school when she got a call that made her scream with joy in the middle of the college library. "Dad, is it true? Is Anna pregnant again?" "It's true, sweetheart, 2 months." "I knew it. I knew you guys were going to give me another little brother." "Or little sister," Caleb James corrected. "Whatever, I'm going to be a big sister again." The news spread quickly through family and friends. The Colonel was thrilled at the prospect of another grandchild, and Mrs. Martha from the guest house, who had become a sort of adopted grandmother to the children, already started knitting baby clothes. During the pregnancy, Savannah continued working at the office, but at a slightly slower pace. Her work had expanded, and she now had a partnership with other lawyers in the region to handle a larger number of cases. Caleb James and Mr. Bennett had managed to buy more land, and the cattle farming was thriving. They had also diversified, starting a small artisanal cheese production that was gaining a good reputation in the area. When the second daughter was born, a girl named Faith, the family was complete. Maddie came from Atlanta to meet her little sister and spent a week helping around the house. "She's perfect," Maddie said, holding the baby in her arms. "And look, she has Savannah's eyes and Daddy's nose." "And Grandpa's forehead," the Colonel added proudly. "Don't forget she might have inherited her mother's stubborn personality," Caleb James joked. "If she did, she'll need it. The women in this family are all fighters," Savannah said with pride. Years passed, and the family continued to grow not in number, but in unity and prosperity. Tonico became a smart and affectionate boy who loved spending time on the farm with his grandfather. Faith showed from a young age a determined and caring personality. Maddie graduated from medical school and decided to do her residency in family medicine, with plans to return to Blue Ridge to serve the rural community. The circle was closing. Savannah's office had become a regional reference in cases of domestic violence and women's rights. She had helped hundreds of women over the years, and some of them had become close friends of the family. Caleb James had become a respected small rural businessman, but he never lost the humility and simplicity that had won Savannah over from day one. Colonel Arthur Sterling had completely transformed. From an authoritarian and controlling man, he had become a loving grandfather and a father who respected his daughter's choices. He spent the last years of his life surrounded by the family he had almost lost because of pride. On an autumn afternoon, 10 years after the wedding that didn't happen, Savannah was on the porch watching her children play in the yard while waiting for Caleb James to come home from work. Maddie was visiting and helping the children with their homework. Her cell phone rang. It was Brooke, who had become a very close friend over the years. "Savannah, I have news to tell you." "What news?" "I'm engaged." Savannah smiled. Brooke had met a wonderful man 2 years before, a history teacher, who treated her with all the respect and affection she deserved. "That's wonderful. When's the wedding?" "In 6 months, and I want you to be my maid of honor." "Of course I accept. It will be an honor." After hanging up, Savannah thought about how life has these interesting twists. Brooke, who had been the key to stopping her forced marriage, was now preparing for a marriage of love. Caleb James arrived home at that moment, interrupting her daydreams. "What are you thinking about with that far-off look?" "I was thinking about how interesting life is, about how sometimes bad things lead to good things. For example, if my father hadn't tried to force me to marry Preston, I would never have run away. If I hadn't run away, my car wouldn't have broken down on the road, and if my car hadn't broken down, I would never have met you." Caleb James smiled and sat down beside her on the porch. "That's true. The worst things in life are sometimes disguises for the best. Do you regret anything, Cal? Getting mixed up in my problems? Standing up to my father? Changing your quiet life?" "Savannah, stop asking those questions," he said, laughing. "How many times do I have to tell you that you were the best thing that ever happened to me? At least a few more times. Then listen closely. I love you. I love our family. I love the life we built together. If I could go back in time, I would do everything exactly the same, even knowing all the problems that came along with me. Especially because of the problems, because facing them with you is how I found out what I was capable of. I found out I could be brave, that I could fight for the ones I love." Savannah snuggled into her husband's arm, watching the quiet afternoon movement on their property. Maddie was helping Toniko with a science project. Faith was drawing on the grass, and life went on its serene, happy course. "Cal?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For stopping to help me that afternoon, for believing in me, for giving me a real family. Thank you for letting me be part of your story." They were silent, enjoying the peace of the moment. In the distance, they could see the Colonel approaching in his pickup truck for the weekly visit that had become a tradition. "Here comes Grandpa," Toniko shouted, running to greet his grandfather. "Grandpa! Grandpa! Look what I made at school!" Faith ran after her brother. The Colonel got out of the pickup, smiling, clearly happy with the warm reception from his grandchildren. "Where's my hug?" he asked, opening his arms. The two children threw themselves at him, each telling their news at the same time. Maddie also came over to greet her grandfather. "How's college going, Doctor?" he asked his oldest granddaughter. "It's great, Grandpa. Just 2 more years, and I'll be back to take care of everyone here." "That's good. The community needs good people like you." The Colonel approached the porch where Savannah and Caleb James were sitting. "How are my kids?" "Good, Dad. And you?" "Couldn't be better. I have the family I always dreamed of, but it took me a while to understand that." They spent the evening talking, playing games with the children and enjoying each other's company. It was a scene that had been repeated every week for years, but never lost its charm. When it was time for the children to go to bed, Faith made a request that touched everyone's hearts. "Mommy, tell the story of how you and Daddy met." "Again? You've heard that story 1,000 times," Maddie protested, laughing. "But I like it. It's the best story in the world." Savannah looked at Caleb James, who nodded, smiling. "All right, but this time Daddy helps tell it." They gathered in the living room, with the children sitting on the floor and the adults on the couch. Savannah began to tell the story, but in a version adapted for the children. Once upon a time, there was a princess who lived in a big castle, but she was very unhappy because she couldn't choose her own life. "And then?" Toniko asked, even though he already knew the story by heart. "Then she decided to be brave and run away to find her happiness," Caleb James continued. "And what happened? Her car broke down on the road, and she was lost and scared. But then the prince showed up. He was a very different kind of prince," Savannah said, smiling. "He didn't have a white horse or a castle. He had a brown horse and a small house. But he had a big heart," Faith finished. "That's right. And he helped the princess even though he didn't know who she was. And they fell in love. They fell in love, but first they had to face many challenges. Like the evil king." "The king wasn't evil," Savannah gently corrected. "He was confused and thought he knew what was best for his daughter, but later he understood he was wrong, and he turned into a good grandpa, the best grandpa in the world," the Colonel said, clearly emotional, "and they lived happily ever after." "They live happily ever after," Caleb James corrected. "The story is still unfolding." After the children went to sleep, the adults stayed a little longer on the porch, enjoying the starry night. "Savannah," the Colonel said thoughtfully, Can I ask you a question I've always wanted to? Sure. That day in the chapel when you were walking toward the altar, what were you thinking? Savannah thought for a moment before answering. I was thinking that was the end of my life, that I was being buried alive in a marriage that would destroy me little by little. And when Caleb James shouted out, objecting to the marriage, I thought it was a miracle, like someone had heard my silent pleas for help. And weren't you scared of what might happen afterward? I was terrified, but I was more afraid of marrying Preston than I was of facing the unknown. Caleb James held his wife's hand. And today? Are you afraid of anything? I'm afraid of losing you all, afraid that something might happen to our family. But I'm not afraid of the future because I know that no matter what happens, we'll face it together. That's how it should be, the Colonel agreed. A united family can handle anything. Maddie joined them on the porch after finishing her studies. What are you all talking about? About family, about love, about the twists and turns life takes, Savannah replied. You know what I think is coolest about our story? Maddie said. What? That everyone grew. Anna grew and became brave. Dad grew and became even more loving. Grandpa grew and became understanding. And I grew and gained a mom and siblings. That's true, Caleb James agreed. We all became better people. And we'll keep growing, Savannah added. Because when you truly love, you never stop learning and improving. Later, when everyone had either gone home or to sleep, Savannah and Caleb James were alone on the porch, as they were almost every night. Cal, can I tell you a secret? Sure. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night just to make sure all this is real, that I'm not dreaming this perfect life. And when you realize it's real, how do you feel? Grateful. Deeply grateful that I had the courage that day to choose love over convenience. I'm grateful every day too. For what? For being raised by a father who taught me to help people in need. If he hadn't taught me that, maybe I would have passed you right by on that road. Savannah turned to look at him. Do you think you would have passed me by? Caleb James thought sincerely about the question. No. I think even without my father's upbringing, I would have stopped. There was something about you that day that caught my attention from the very first moment. What? Your strength. Even desperate, you kept your dignity. Even scared, you didn't play the victim. I saw a warrior disguised as a damsel in distress. You saw more in me than I saw in myself. And you saw possibilities in me that I didn't even know existed. They stayed in silence for a while longer, each lost in their own thoughts about the journey they had taken together. Cal? Yes? If our daughter, when she grows up, comes to us one day and says she wants to marry someone we don't approve of, what will we do? Caleb James laughed at the question. We'll trust her. And if she brings a guy to our house and says she loves him, we'll give him a chance. Because we learned that true love isn't chosen by bank account or social status. And if he's a ranch hand like you were when we met, then we'll see if he has a good heart like mine, he replied playfully. So modest. Hey, you said my heart was good first. They laughed together, the sound echoing in the tranquility of the rural night. Savannah. Yes? I love you. I love you too. Today, tomorrow, and always. And so, under the starry sky of the Georgia countryside, the couple who met on a dusty road continued writing their love story, surrounded by the family they had built on a foundation of respect, understanding, and so much love. The end. Now tell us what you thought of the story and where you're watching us from. If you have something to share with us, leave it in the comments with sincere words. Do you think Savannah made the right decision by running away from the arranged marriage? We'd love to read your opinion. Thank you so much for your company. Don't forget to leave your like and, above all, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other exciting stories.